Okay, so again, Pacific Alumni Relations wants to thank Mike Wartz, who is the head of the University Pacific Holt Atherton Special Collections and Archives. So Mike oversees the use and preservation of the historical archives of nearly 500 collections, including your university archives. So anyone who's an alumni, you can come in, see these archives. Are really amazing if you get a chance to come back to the university. UOP is the home, as we were mentioning before, to the largest collection of the Muir archival material in the world. So Mike Wartz has used these Muir drawings to create the subject for the talk that we're going to be doing today, as well as using those to create his book, John Muir's Grand Yosemite, Musing and Sketches. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Mike. Again, thank you so much for being here, and let's have some fun.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Chris, and welcome everyone to coming out today. This is going to be kind of exciting. Looking forward to zooming through this wonderful Zoom talk today. And so I'm going to go ahead and get started by sharing my screen. And let's take a look at what we're talking about today. Here we go. So this is what we're going to be talking about today. John Muir's Grand Yosemite, Musing and Sketches. And there is a book that's going to be coming out shortly with these. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that as we get into it. So what can you expect from today's talk? Well, you can expect to see a lot of pretty pictures, especially drawings from John Muir. And you're going to see some other cool pictures of Yosemite as well. You're going to hear some musing of John Muir. You're going to hear him talk a few quotes of John Muir, and then you may hear a few stories about Muir or Yosemite to help you kind of get into the larger context of what we're talking about today. As Chris suggested, you'll have an opportunity to follow along with Google Earth. We're going to be dropping coordinates every now and then. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute if the time and the place provides. And then lastly, if you have any questions, Chris has kind of spelt out a couple of different ways that you can do that if you have those questions. So what's my inspiration for this? Basically, it goes pretty far back, and it's this idea of sense of place. I've always been fascinated when I go to places, and as a historian, I really like to go places and actually feel what has happened there. And I had this feeling for the first time in my life in 1991. This is only a couple of years after the Berlin Wall fell, and I was visiting Leipzig, Germany, and I visited the location of the St. Nicholas Church. And this is where East Germans peaceably assembled in those first couple of, or those between September and November of 1989, they peaceably assembled, and they'd go there each Monday evening. I went there about 2 years afterwards, and when I stood where these people stood, I almost felt like I was there during the peaceable assemblies, and I really felt a kinship, and I could actually feel the history there, and it was kind of a remarkable moment for me. And it's extra remarkable because I'm not that kind of person. John Muir once described one of his friends. He says, the angular factiness of his pursuits have kept him too cold a distant from the spirit world. That's me. I am not a spiritual person. My angular factiness can really do this. But when I felt this, it was really powerful. And I came to UOP in 2004 and started working with John Muir's stuff. I'm already familiar with them. And I quickly realized I want to have that same experience that I had in Leipzig, Germany with John Muir's stuff as well. He's famed naturalist, father of the national parks, grandfather of the environmental movement, and he's a key player in the conservation movement. So yeah, we've got a lot of drawings in our collections for John Muir. He made hundreds, maybe even thousands of drawings. They're technical, sometimes they're schematics, all sorts of things. And these show up in his journals, they show up in his letters, they show up in articles, they show up in books, and as drawings themselves. And this is a major part of why we put this book together, and that is we wanted to share John Muir's drawings. Now you can actually see a lot of these, actually can see everything online. We've put a lot of it online, but we really wanted to share that. And so this is what we've kind of done. I'm working with the Yosemite Conservancy. I worked with the Yosemite Conservancy to produce this book, and this is basically what you get. We'll get into this particular one in a little bit more detail, but just to kind of give you an idea of what you're going to see. Obviously, you get one of John Muir's drawings. It's pretty cool. You also get a location as to exactly where you can find that drawing, where Muir sat when he made that drawing. Then you get a little bit of what Muir had to say either about that area or what you see in there. And then lastly, there's some commentary to tell you about maybe some other things that you may have missed. Here's a map to show you the 25 different sites that we included in the book. And there's a copy of the book there. And of course, if you're interested in ordering the book, there'll be opportunities throughout. But if you just can't wait, you're welcome to go to shop.yosemite.org and you can search for my name and you will find the book there. So yeah, we have these 25 sites throughout the valley. Now, we are not in Yosemite, so I don't have to tell you too much about being careful while you're there, but be careful while you're there. There's a couple of warnings I wanted to make, and these are warnings that are also in the book, things to be aware of. Some of the sites that I'm showing you today are not the exact site where Muir stood when he made these sketches. And we've done this for a couple of reasons. One thing, Yosemite can be dangerous. In fact, if you're not really smart, you can do something like what I just did here and stand at the top of Liberty Cap above a 1,000-foot cliff above Nevada Fall. Don't do this. Don't do this at home either. This is not a very smart thing to do. And as you can tell, I'm taking a selfie. Another very not smart thing to do. So don't do these things. Some of these places are actually dangerous and we don't want you going to them. So we've come up with spots that are safe where you can kind of get the same idea that Muir did. On the left, on the right there, some of you may recognize who that is. That is Huell Hauser. He is doing the other thing that we don't want you to do in Yosemite. So much of Yosemite, despite its strong granite walls, there's a lot of fragile ecosystems in Yosemite. We don't want you tromping in the meadow. We don't want you going off trail. So Muir once said, the mountains are calling and I must go and I will work on while I can, studying incessantly. I'm going to amend that a little bit. The mountains are calling and you must go, but work on to protect yourself and study your surroundings incessantly. All right, so let's get started. Yeah.
Mike, before we get started and go a little bit further, would you mind just resharing the screen and just selecting the...
You bet. So that way... Stop sharing the screen and then reshare it?
Yep, and then just select the one window that you want to share. That way we can get a little bit larger pictures for people.
How's that? Does that work?
There we go. That's looking better. Awesome. Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you. So now let's go back a little bit. I first started doing this rephotography. I did it as a rephotography project, not a redrawing project early on. And this is Calaveras Big Trees, as you can tell. And for those of you that are familiar with Calaveras Big Trees, you've probably walked the North Grove a million times. In the background here is the mother of the forest. And there's John Muir. I've kind of zoomed in. He's right not by this gigantic burrow, right by the mother of the forest. If you ever get the opportunity, you can stand exactly where John Muir did. And this was kind of my first opportunity to kind of start doing this and kind of got me interested. But the first place that I did it for this particular project goes back, clear back to 2009 was the first time that I visited the Tuolumne Grove and found this giant dead snag. Now I think Chris should be sending or sharing the URL for this particular spot if you want to kind of follow along in Google Earth. We'll do one together a little bit later, but this one is if you want to kind of get into that right now. One of the things that the book provides, and what I really like to provide about John Muir, is reading his quotes. I want to read to you a quote about this old snag that he made a drawing of. He says, I found a black charred stump about 30 feet in diameter, about 80 or 90 feet high, a venerable, impressive old monument of a tree that in its prime may have been the monarch of the grove. Seedlings and saplings growing up here and there, thrifty and hopeful, giving no hint of the dying out of the species. Not any unfavorable change of climate, but only fire threatens the existence of these noblest of God's trees. And then he goes on to say, sorry, I was not able to get a count of the old monument's annual rings. So this is a giant sequoia tree. It looks a little different today. You can see that Muir made it kind of look a little bit stunted, but in actuality, whoops, it's actually a rather tall tree. And you can see right here, there's somebody has drilled a hole through it. It was actually a tunnel that was drilled into it in 1878. Today, this road was being closed off in the 1990s. So you can go here and you can even see that I have my notebook up on the side of the trail there where you can stand pretty much where John Muir stood to make this. I came across this image because one of John Muir's great-great-grandsons, Robert Hanna, had posted this picture in Facebook, and he wanted to go exactly where John Muir had sat. And as you can see, I found it pretty close. I didn't quite get the aspect ratio and things like that, but I'm definitely sitting on the same rock as John Muir. And he's right below Vernal Fall. And this is what Muir is trying to tell us about Vernal Fall. He says, watch its waters calmly bending over the brow of the precipice in a sheet 80 feet wide, changing in color from green to purplish gray and white until dashed on a boulder talus. Thence issuing from beneath its fine broad spray cloud, we see the tremendously adventurous river still unspent, beating its way down the wildest and deepest of all canyons in a gray roaring rapids. Now this particular place, we've sharing the longitude and latitude if you want to do that one. We're gonna, again, we'll do this a little bit more later. There's another photograph that was taken from the same spot. And I was pretty proud of this particular one. It's not very much further away from that last one. But as you can see, I actually managed to figure out that I was in the exact location because there is that little Y-shaped crack that you can see in both the original picture and the later picture. This is John Muir. Now, this is one of these opportunities where we kind of learn a little bit about something about Yosemite. And one of the things that strikes me when I see this picture is the women. They're all wearing full dresses. This is 1910 and they are visiting Yosemite. And I think that there might be a misperception that Yosemite may have just been a men's domain early on. Well, that's not true. John Muir started the Sierra Club in 1892 and quite quickly, women joined the Sierra Club. In fact, many of the early Sierra Club outings had a lot of women. This particular picture includes Henry Osborne, who is a paleontologist, geologist, and president of the American Museum of Natural History, but it also includes his wife, Lucretia, and his daughters, Josephine and Virginia. So if you ever get a chance to go up there, realize that this is pretty far along the trail. This is about 1.5 miles up, and they didn't have a really nice road to go up at that time. Okay. We're sending along the URL here. Maybe I'll go ahead and demonstrate with this one. I'm going to grab the URL myself. And if you want, I'm going to show you how to do this real quickly with Google Earth if you want to. First thing I need to do is get in and share this screen. Oh, wait, I got to stop sharing here and then share a different screen. Now here's Google Earth for you, Google Earth Pro. And you can, once you grab that URL, you can paste it into, whoops, hold on a second. You can take that same URL, paste it into your search engine. I keep doing the wrong thing, sorry about this. No, it's not wanting to pick it up. Well, anyway, once you're in there, I'll back out. I happen to know where this site is, so I'll just go there. This site is up here. We've got Half Dome here. There's Liberty Cap and looking down the valley. This particular site should take you right about here. You can actually see a little bridge here. And if you really zoom in, once you're kind of in close, you can actually, whoops, there we go. And we get a little bit more of a different view, so you can kind of see what we're seeing. And this view here should look a little bit like the image on the left that I showed you a minute ago. So that's if you really kind of want to get into the Google Earth aspect of this. But I just wanted to show you how that worked because it is kind of fun, and I wanted to do that. Okay. Oops. Okay. Chris, am I looking at are we looking at the PowerPoint again?
Yes, sir. We are looking at those beautiful sketches.
Thank you. Okay, so digress. Let's take a look. Okay, so this is looking downstream from that bridge, right about where that bridge was. And there's John Muir's drawing on the left, and there's me finding my picture on the right. This was kind of an interesting one. We're actually halfway between the base of, or the top of Vernal Fall and the base of Nevada Fall. And as you can see in those middle pictures there, I've kind of zoomed in to kind of show you that I'm not too far off. I wasn't in the exact place. I still feel like I want to kind of hunt this one down a little bit. It was cool. You can see in the lower right hand of the original picture, there is a stump there. So, and there's this is Glacier Point over here, and this is Grizzly Peak. And for those of you that are really familiar, there's a place called Sierra Point, which is, I think, right about here. It's a really wonderful place that's kind of off trail in Yosemite. Okay, this is going the other direction now, looking up at Liberty Cap. And you can also see Nevada Fall kind of through the trees there. Things are a little bit different now. That's my friend Bobby Wen. He joined me on a lot of these hikes. I can't remember if this is right before or right after I took that really stupid selfie, but clearly I made it this time. But that's still not an endorsement to do selfies when you're standing on the edges of cliffs. Okay, whoops, let me go back. This is kind of an interesting spot. When Muir was here, shortly after Muir was here, this is probably about 1873, it was also about this time that this Snow family had built a hotel up here. Now, mind you, this is again about 2 to 3 miles up Merced Canyon from the valley floor. So there was a little hotel built in there for a while that people could visit. It's gone now, it burned down and eventually is pretty much completely abandoned. But if you go up there and you poke around, you might find some interesting little pieces that'll indicate that there was a hotel there at one time. Okay, this is probably the most beautiful shot of the valley. And I kind of want to make another little point with this one. You probably have already recognized a lot of the things, and I think we haven't shared the latitude, longitude yet, but there's Half Dome, we've got Royal Arches, North Dome, and Washington Column all there. And this is probably Muir's, in my opinion, Muir's most beautiful drawing. And I'm inspired to read a piece to kind of make you think about when you do get to visit Yosemite next, or maybe even when you're looking at the book. And he writes, "Once in the valley, it's important to know what to do with oneself. I would advise sitting from morning till night under some willow bush on a riverbank where there's a wide view. This will be doing the valley far more effectively than riding along trails in constant motion from point to point." And I think this is a really valid point, because I think it's so easy to get dragged into Yosemite and feel like you have to see everything in 2 hours or 1 hour or even 1 day or 3 days or a week, but it's okay to stop. And that hopefully is another value of this book. It tells you to sit down after you find that spot. You can measure it up and just kind of sit and go and gape in awe and gasp in awe like John Muir did when he was there. This one's kind of an interesting backstory behind it. I thought that this would be super easy to find. I'd just go out there and it's like, oh, here's Half Dome, here's a river in the foreground, this will be easy. So I go off and I look along the rivers there and I'm looking everywhere, and it's like, this one doesn't quite match up. As you can see it, you can see Washington Column there and Half Dome there, and it's like, this is just not matching up. So I did something really cool. I hooked up my Google Earth with VR and basically figured out how to nail a lot of these places using Google Earth VR, because I can literally fly around the valley and I can line up these points like between Half Dome and Washington Column there. And then I could just back up until I hit the ground, and then I look at the ground and it's like, oh, there I am. I'm at Cook's Meadow. This is a most obvious spot of all. I kind of feel a little bit sheepish about not getting this one right, but it was definitely a fun trip to try to figure this one out. And once I get there, I do the longitude and latitude. And this was actually being a particularly busy spot. This is also the first spot in the book, but being a particularly busy spot, it gave me an opportunity to share. There were other people out there. This woman was from Japan, I believe, and she was very excited about my project as well. And this is probably the most fun that I had on these trips. Not only was it finding the appropriate words to go with these spots, but also to share the knowledge that I've gained about John Muir and Yosemite when I met people. And I snapped this quick little longitude and latitude, and then off I would go. But the funny thing about this is that I bet if you look in your camera, if you've been in Yosemite and you've got it in your phone right now, I bet if you looked in there, you probably have this picture in your phone already. In fact, I had visited Yosemite 3 years ago, and this was already in there long before I went searching for this site. This is my brother-in-law's picture from the exact same spot. So take a look in your phone when you get a minute. You probably already have this site bagged for your book. So let me read you a little passage here. April 15th, 1870. Bright, balmy full moon is looking over shoulder of South Dome, had 3 pine trees and a rock upon its disk. Outlined with startling distinctiveness, no other tree, however faint, at all visible. It looked like a medal. The trees seemed fairly melted into the white silver of the moon. And this is just a really delicate drawing of John Muir's. But interestingly enough, this appears initially as a drawing or as a sketch in one of his journals. And a little plug here for our journals. We have, gosh, nearly 100 journals and notebooks available online that you can view by visiting the University of Pacific's archives. And if you are very interested, as you can see, some of John Muir's writing is not really easy to read. And we are still looking for volunteers that can get in there and help us to transcribe this. So if you want to learn more about that, you can either email me or Chris, and we can get you hooked up on how to do that. Let's talk a little bit more about how I found this spot. This one was a fun one. It's not very far from the last spot that we were just at. In fact, there's a number of drawings that were made from the more or less the same spot, and that's about where John Muir's early cabins were. So he's probably making these when he's pretty much from his cabin porches. This one took a little bit of internet work. I had to find an appropriate celestial program or an astronomical program so I could figure out exactly where the moon would have set if you were out in the valley. And sure enough, we're pretty sure that it was right there. And my friend Bob Hare, I'll talk a little bit more about him in a minute. He helped me figure this one out. And yeah, I have a lot to say about Bob, but we'll save that one for a moment. Okay, these are a couple of really fantastic drawings. I really like these two a lot. And I think Chris is sharing the longitude and latitude for you. And I really like the one on the left. I've zoomed in here because you can see a little bit about the cultural history of the valley as well. You can see that there are some huge logs there. Were these logs that John Muir helped to mill when he lived there? There's a lot of, I don't know if I'd call it a controversy, but there's a lot of people that say, well, John Muir, he's this really right-on guy. Why was he working in a mill? Well, according to him, when he was working in that mill, no logs were set that didn't fall down. He did not go out and chop trees in the valley. Everything that he cut had already fallen. So maybe that's what these logs are. Another thing you might notice is that there's a little fence in the valley. So there's already fencing. There's already places to put sheep and cows and horses and everything else in the valley. But this is that same, more or less the same location. In fact, you can kind of see the cars there in the background. We're right near the where that other shot was. This is kind of the, let's see, this would be the end of the lower Yosemite Falls Trail. In fact, there's a bus stop for the shuttles that are right there. A lot of stories that we can tell about these. We've got Glacier Point on this side. John Muir visited Glacier Point with President Theodore Roosevelt in 1903. And really what they were trying to do was trying to bring all of Yosemite, not just the valley, not just Mariposa Grove, but all of Yosemite under federal jurisdiction. But the picture on the right there is Sentinel Rock. Now this one's got a great story, and I see that someone's already chimed in on the Q&A asking a little bit about John Muir and earthquakes. So I'm going to read you a little passage of John Muir's earthquake experience in 1872 when he was living in the valley. The shocks were so violent and varied and succeeded one another so closely that I had to balance myself carefully in walking as if on the deck of a ship among waves. And it seemed impossible that the high cliffs of the valley could escape being shattered. In particular, I feared that the sheer-fronted Sentinel Rock, towering above my cabin, would be shaken down, and I took shelter back of a large yellow pine, as if that's going to do a lot of good. Took shelter behind a large yellow pine, hoping it might protect me from at least the smaller outbounding boulders. And then he goes on to say, it was as if nature were wrecking her Yosemite temple and getting ready to build a still better one. So there's Sentinel Rock, and there it is in the background. Sentinel Dome is up there near, if you look up there, it's actually, these two are pretty much adjacent to each other as well. So Sentinel Dome is up there. This is Sentinel Rock. So this is that cabin I was telling you about. John Muir wrote, from the Yosemite Creek, where it first gathers its beaten waters at the foot of the fall, I dug a small ditch and brought a stream of water into the cabin, entering at one end and out the other, with just current enough to allow it to sing and warble in low, sweet tones, delightful at night while I lay in bed. In the spring, the ferns pushed through between the joints of the slab. Dainty little climbing frogs occasionally climbed the ferns and made fine music in the night. So this one was kind of a fun one for me to search. I found that if you go today, if you go to Yosemite, you go to the base of the fall there is a plaque for his cabin. As you can see, the plaque has that exact same drawing in it. And so I wanted to learn a little bit more about this, and I did a little bit more research, and there is William Frederick Baudet on the left there. This is William Frederick Baudet. This is John Muir's first biographer, This is John Muir's daughter, Wanda. We thank her for passing down so much of John Muir's material. In fact, as I mentioned earlier, one of the Muir's descendants are in on this line, and this Wanda is his, oh, I'm going to get this wrong, Bill. I apologize. I think this is your great-grandmother, Wanda Hanna. And then that's superintendent of the parks. Now you can see they're getting ready to place the plaque, but it's not in its final resting spot. That's what it looks like today, or this is what it looked like just a little bit later. That's Rose Beal, young woman sitting on there. And then that's one of my colleagues sitting on it just last year. But this doesn't help solve the problem. This drawing does not match the landscape behind it. This is more like what is actually going on. There's a nice big baseball field of all things in the valley. There's a baseball field, and I believe that the actual cabin rested on the edge of this little, well, now it's a baseball park, but it was a meadow at the time, and I believe that's where Muir's place was. And it's interesting because I found a letter that is not yet in the archives where William Frederick Baudet was saying basically, oh yeah, you know, I think I didn't place the plaque exactly where I meant it to be placed. Also very close to this spot is this infamous place. This is the sawmill that John Muir worked in for a few years that I had mentioned earlier. And as you can see there, that's the actual letter that this drawing is in. And Muir writes, "I have a small box-like home fastened beneath the gable of the mill looking westward down the valley. People call it a hang nest." You can see it hanging there. People call it a hang nest because it seems unsupported. Fortunately, the only people that I dislike are afraid to enter it. The hole in the roof is to command a view of the glorious South Dome. There's a corresponding skylight on the other side of the roof, which commands full view of Upper Yosemite Falls. And the window on the end is a sweeping down the valley among the pines and cedars and firs. The window in the mill roof to the right is above my bed, and I have to look at the stars on calm nights. All right. This is an interesting drawing here. This is a notebook that Muir, this isn't a journal of one of John Muir's, this is a notebook. And what he did is about 20 years after he experienced what became the famous book, My First Summer in the Sierra, is he wrote this notebook and he described what happened on that trip almost 20 years earlier. And he made this drawing. And it's like, well, we've already got a problem. There's no way we can stand where this drawing was done because Muir is standing out in space. Kind of give you an idea of what it looks like. This is a photograph that I found that shows you more or less what that would, more or less that view would be from space. And this is an interesting day. What Muir really wanted to do was he wanted to feel what it was like to be water, to fly off there. Now, he didn't actually want to fly off, but he wanted to stand on the edge and watch the water go over the fall. This is John Muir. He's the ultimate observer. He loves to observe. He likes to get in and understand things the best he can. He's a master observer. And he writes about this day. He says, "While perched on that narrow niche, I was not distinctly conscious of danger. The tremendous grandeur of the fall in form and sound and motion acting at close range smothered the sense of fear. How long I remained down there or how I returned, I can hardly tell. Anyhow, I had a glorious time and I got back to camp after dark, enjoying triumphant exhilaration, soon followed by dull weariness. Hereafter, I'll try to keep from such extravagant nerve-straining places." Interestingly enough, that night, Muir dreamt again and again of falling into the valley from up high on the cliffs. And one time, he says, "One time springing to my feet, I said, 'This time is real, all must die.' And where could a mountaineer find a more glorious death?" And I've thought about that line a lot throughout my life, this idea of, you know, where do you want to be when it happens? Do you want to be crossing Pacific Avenue to get a burger at McDonald's when you go down, or do you want to fly over that cliff? Okay, that's not an encouragement or an endorsement or anything else like that. So let's move on. So talking about Bob Harrigan, Bob did a wonderful job of kind of coming up with probably the most likely spot where John Muir actually stood when he did this. And as Bob put it so eloquently when we were talking about it today, he said, yeah, Muir basically found the worst possible perspective to make this drawing to show where he really was. It's very interesting because if he'd just crossed Yosemite Creek upriver a little bit and came around to this side, this is something anybody can do. You can walk right down to the point where Bob is standing to take this picture, and you can look at Yosemite Falls. You can look right down and see the fall, and he could have all done it very easily. But That's John Muir for you, but he found this amazing place out here. And he's also drawing it about 20 years after the fact. Now I showed you this one at the beginning to kind of show you the spread. I think Chris is posting the longitude and latitude if you want to follow along. This one, it says lower end Yosemite Valley from top of South Wall. And my first thought was this has got to be from Glacier Point. And so I hopped into Google Earth VR, and quickly realized that it's actually further down. And this is the exact spot that Muir stood. And it's near Taft Point. Taft Point is actually out on the edge there. It wasn't called Taft Point when Muir was there. That was probably named after Taft visited in 1909. And you can see I got this one pretty well lined up. This is also one of the sites that we've come up with a safer alternative to look at it instead of being right there. This is kind of cool. You can also see the massive expansiveness of El Capitan there. And you can, if you had really good binoculars, you might be able to spot a climber on there, but it'd be pretty hard. This is also interesting to look at how the river has kind of taken a different direction from when Muir was there to what it looks like today. I was very overjoyed to find that, yeah, sure enough, we got this old tree here, but it's now just a stump. This little bush or whatever, it's long gone, but the tree that used to be there, still represented by a stump. And while I was there, I met up with some friends of mine, and my brother Ron was there too. And we did what we like to call Muiring. We like to get on the edge of these cliffs and look up with our heads upside down. You can see a bunch of my students that I take on classes with the geology and history programs to go ahead and do this when you see a site. And Muir kind of felt this is something that needs to be done. If one spends too much time in the valley, you kind of get used to your surrounding. In fact, Muir kind of called this a comfortable familiarity. And he once wrote years later when he was in Alaska, he says, all that is necessary to make any landscape visible and therefore impressive is to regard it from a new point of view or from an old one with our heads upside down. Then we behold a new heaven and earth and are born again as if we've gone on a pilgrimage to some far off holy land. Now, I recommend that after this talk is over, maybe you could do it right now. You could lay down in your room and put your head on the side of the bed and look at these pictures upside down if you want, but try it even in your backyard. Take a look and you'll see that whole new heaven and earth are born again if you mirror the landscape that you see. Some of the other places, this is Grand Canyon, this is Rainbow Canyon, this is in Southern California. Some of you probably recognize Crater Lake there, and you can see Half Dome here, and of course the other places. Speaking of Half Dome, this is one of John Muir's drawings of Half Dome. This particular one is a schematic, and Muir is kind of explaining what's going on here. And what he wants to explain is how did the glaciers move across Half Dome at that time when Yosemite was created. And that's was Muir's idea, was that Yosemite was created by glaciers. We're going to get a little bit more into that a little bit later. But Muir, this is the actual spot. This was actually an amazing day. I was up there with a friend of mine who actually chose not to come all the way to where I was. I'm not too far off trail here, but it is an amazing view. And I just sat there, I don't know, I was probably up there for an hour just in awe. And in a sense, I just wanted to thank Muir again for providing me with this amazing place to go to. This is kind of what ended up Muir in a book later on. Muir used this same drawing as a schematic in a book explaining Yosemite's glacial origins. So, as I mentioned earlier, we have all of John Muir's journals and sketchbooks, and this is definitely a sketch. There are a number of things that Muir put into his books that are not really these polished final drawings like you'll see in the book, but we've included this one in the book. And this is about snow banners. And Muir writes, when I had reached an elevation above Sunnyside, the tips of the mountains of the Merced Group, now called the Clark Range, began to rise above the curve between South Dome, which is right here, and Mount Star King. They were adorned as I had never seen them before. From the thin wave-like summit of Mount Clark and the sharp pyramid-like point of Gray Mountain, there streamed a splendid white banner of splendid dimensions. You can see these little banners coming off the tops of the peaks there. These banners were at first bent upward and then continued with sublime motion horizontally at a length of at least 3,000 feet. Seen against the blue sky, the effect was indescribably grand, and he called these snow banners. In fact, he was so drawn to these snow banners. This is the view today. This is a little ways up the Yosemite Falls Trail. You can look out, you have to turn around when you're hiking up there and look out. And you can see that this is the original drawing. Muir drew it again, and then he drew it again, kind of almost a watercolor. He drew it once more as a draft for a article that he was working on for a book. And then lastly, this is what an engraver had taken Muir's sketches and turned it into that. So we went from this little sketchy thing here to this beautiful engraving that shows up in one of his books. Okay, I'm going to digress here a little bit, not too much. This site is not in the book, so you're getting a special bonus here. And Chris is sharing the longitude and latitude with you. This might seem like it's not much. It's not that pretty of a drawing, and you kind of really have to bend your brain to figure out where it was. I had to use Google Earth with VR to kind of get myself an idea of where it could be. It took me a while to figure out where it was, but this is really more of a story about discovery. Some of you may be familiar with the most famous of all of John Muir's stories, and that's the story about Stikine and the glacier that he had when he was in the Stikine, the dog, and the glacier that he visited in Alaska. And this dog insisted on following him. The dog said, you know, I'm going to come with you no matter what. And Muir said, no, you stay here at the camp. It's safer here. The weather was awful. They were going out on a glacier. It was not going to be a very, very fun day. But for Muir, it was a great day. But the dog insisted. And finally, Muir said, so at last I told him to come on if he must. I gave him a piece of bread I had in my pocket, and then we struggled on together, and thus began the most memorable of all my wild days. This day, searching for this funky little drawing, was probably the most memorable of all my days of working on this project, because it was just a wonderful opportunity to get into a pretty remote part of the valley that is basically inaccessible and not easily can get to it. So there's Bob Hare again. Bob has been, without a doubt, my most, I can't say enough about Bob. He made this project possible. And Bob has done some amazing work on backcountry sites throughout Yosemite. And I'm anxiously awaiting that he's able to put a book together like mine someday, because he's found so many different sites and deep in the backcountry of Yosemite. And he's got a real artist's eye and can see things. But anyway, so as part of our memorable day, we had to ride up a service road. We dumped our bikes deep into the forest, and then we started hiking. And as we went up, we got tired, so we sat on this rock to take a break. And we turned around, and it was like, oh my gosh, Muir sat on this rock when he made this drawing. There is no two ways around it. And of course, we celebrate that great moment, and off we went. And sure enough, that was the exact spot that Muir stood. Things have changed a little bit. There are trees in the way and things like that. But it was such an amazing day to know that we were sitting exactly where John Muir was. That was my Leipzig, Germany moment of this entire thing, was knowing. There was a few times when this happened, when it was very clear exactly where John Muir was sitting was exactly where I was sitting as well. We went up a little higher up into this canyon. This is the Illilouette Canyon, the very not recommended for non-experienced mountaineers to go up to there. We found this beautiful drawing in there too. You can see I don't have it exactly right. I need to be a little closer to this wall here. This is panorama cliffs here. You can kind of see maybe why I couldn't get over it. Would have required crossing this the Illilouette River right there, or the Illilouette Creek, to get to it. But whoops, let me go back and look at that a little bit more. But you can see Half Dome peeking out in both John Muir's drawing and some of the other things there. This is just an absolutely beautiful spot, and I'd recommend that you go there, but it's not an easy one to get to, and it is dangerous. Okay, speaking about danger, this is what I call a glacial eye view of Tenaya Canyon. Kind of give you a little idea of what you're looking at. There's Half Dome there. This is Sentinel Dome. This is Watkins, Mount Watkins and Watkins Pinnacles. Yosemite Valley would be kind of down and then, whoops, kind of down and to the right, down in here. You can barely see it. This beckons a pretty interesting story of John Muir's. Muir had been living in the San Francisco Bay Area for a little while, doing a lot of writing. That's what he did during some of the winter times. He'd go down to the Bay Area. And sometimes he'd come back to Yosemite, and he said that the rocks were talking to him, calling him to come back. And so Muir said, and he wasn't feeling very well, so he writes, "I started up the canyon of Tenaya, caring little about the quantity of bread I carried, for I thought a fast, a storm, and a difficult canyon were just the medicine I needed. This canyon is accessible only to mountaineers." That's a hint, by the way. This canyon is only accessible to mountaineers. "I scrambled around Tenaya Fall and was ascending a precipitous and smooth rock front when suddenly I fell, for the first time since I touched foot to Sierra Rock. I became insensible, and when consciousness returned, I was trembling, but not injured. I stood up and I said, 'There,' said I, addressing my feet, 'that is what you get with intercourse with stupid town stairs and dead pavements.' I was now awake, and I felt confident that the last of the town fog had been shaken from both heads and feet." So this site is, again, as Muir said, it's an inaccessible canyon. So I don't want to be sending you to an inaccessible canyon. Fortunately, I found this really cool spot along the trail going to the top of Clouds Rest. And this is a really neat hike. It's only, if I remember right, I think it's only a couple of miles. I'd have to look at the book, which I happen to have right here. Whoops, I happen to have right here. And it tells you exactly how far you need to hike out on that trail to find this point. Now you can see I didn't get things perfect. Obviously, the landscape's a little bit lower. And so I have to actually be down in this canyon, but there is Mount Watkins, there's Half Dome. So if you wanted to repeat this one, you can go to this very safe place to look at it. Strenuous hike, but quite safe, and a beautiful, absolutely fantastic view of the valley. Okay, Chris is probably sharing you the longitude and latitude on this one. I've covered up the name of this, so maybe you'll recognize it. And I have to give a little shout out here. The original drawing is that one in the upper left there. And the amazing artists at the Yosemite Conservancy were able to just bring this drawing out and make it pop. So this is what Muir is saying about this little area. "This valley is about 3/4 miles wide, dry and ferny at the head with azaleas, alders, and conifers along the river. In the middle of the dense grove of alders and young cedar that are so close that it's difficult to get through. Big Rock Creek Big Rock Creek is about twice the size of Yosemite Creek. We're not in Yosemite Valley. It divides the big delta into two main branches. Had a feast of raspberry on its banks where the bears had been feasting before me. Very abundant. Vegetation as if in Yosemite." Now, if you've followed along on Google Earth, or if you probably are a really good guesser, that's where we are. We are in, well, you probably know now, Hetch Hetchy. There's a lot of backstory here. I don't want to get too much into it, but you know, you've probably all heard the story of Hetch Hetchy and are familiar with it. Basically, San Francisco had been looking for a place to get water, and they could have gotten it from anywhere. They were looking in the 1890s and the early 1900s. San Francisco earthquake and fire strike, and that pretty much decimates the city of San Francisco, and they get very focused on trying to find a place to get their water. And so they chose Hetch Hetchy Valley, which strangely enough is in the middle of a national park. This became a major point in how we feel about the environment and how we take care of our natural spaces. Before this, it was not that big a deal to consider putting a dam in a national park, but it was after this big bitter fight where Muir at one point wrote, "Damn Hetch Hetchy, as well as damn water tanks as well as dam for water tanks to people's cathedrals and churches. For no holier temple has ever been consecrated by the heart of man." He did not want to see Hetch Hetchy have a dam in it because it's in a national park. It wasn't that Muir was against having a dam, just don't put it in a national park. There are plenty of places we can put dams. The Riker Act was signed into law in 1913. Muir dies in 1914, so he never had to see the same view that we see today. But we do hope today that someday somebody will be able to get in there and drain Hetch Hetchy, and we'll be able to see it like John Muir had seen it all those years ago. I have quite a few trees that I was able to find. You'd think trees would be impossible to find. Well, I got kind of lucky. I found this old map available through the National Park Service. And as you can, I don't know if you can read that, on the left it says Samoset. And that's the name of this tree. And sure enough, I found that there's a Sanoset, but that's close enough. I could probably find it, so I found it on the map. and I went up in deep into the Mariposa Grove, and I found it. There it is. Okay, you're probably looking at it saying, dude, you know, you might be a professor there at UOP, but you don't know anything about looking at trees, because that is not Samoset. I can't tell what that is. It's just a bunch of trees. Well, this was kind of cool. If you get in there and you zoom in on that same drawing, there's a little tiny black notch at the bottom of Samoset. And look here, there's a little tiny black notch at the bottom of Samoset. This is a really fascinating story too. These are the giant sequoia trees that you've probably heard about, these massive, gigantic sequoia trees. And Muir first visited this grove in 1868, the Mariposa Grove. This is the first time that he'd ever seen these trees that he'd heard about and read about that he wanted to see. In 1871, he visited these trees again with famed transcendentalist Ralph Waldo Emerson. And Emerson, there was at a time, this was a time when people would like to name the trees. And Emerson named this one Samoset for the first American that made contact with a pilgrim. It's at Plymouth Rock in 1620. Now, this idea of naming trees and putting plaques on them and everything like that is certainly something that the National Park Service today frowns upon. But even Muir felt that this was not a good thing to do. In fact, he wrote, he said, naming of the trees, or worse, scarring them with black glaring names carved on marble tablets and countersunk in the brown bark, producing a shabby tombstone appearance. So yeah, the park doesn't do this sort of thing today. We don't want to be putting plaques on things. Okay, Yosemite Valley from North Dome. This is a very bittersweet place for me. Muir made so many drawings from the top of North Dome that he wanted so he could see the valley. And unfortunately, we only have a few drawings that Muir made from this spot, despite all the times that he said that he spent the day drawing from up there. But this drawing tells us a little bit more. It tells us about the formation of Yosemite. Now, as you can see there, it's a valley. You're like, okay, it's a valley. And you can see where Muir might get the idea that it was formed by a glacier. Well, it's actually Josiah Whitney, the California state geologist, who was there before that. And he said, oh, no. Has nothing to do with glaciers. Whitney writes, the bottom of the valley sank down to an unknown depth owing to its support being withdrawn from underneath. So a bunch of earthquakes and things like that. Subsistence over extensive areas, a portion of the Earth's crust, is not at all new idea in geology, and there's nothing peculiar application of which needs to excite surprise. Longer story in there. Whitney does not really like to get excited about very much. But yeah, Muir came along later and determined that Yosemite was probably created through glaciers. And Muir also was important in understanding that there were living glaciers in the high countries of Yosemite. He was the first one to discover that not only did glaciers used to cut Yosemite, but even in the high country, there were still glaciers today. So let's talk about that a little bit. Here is another sketch of Muir's. This is a sketch that Muir made, and let's move on here. This is labeled Montagne rock. Now, this is a French term for this kind of rock. It's called a roche montagnée. And for those of you that speak French out there, you can direct message me later and say, no, that's not how it's pronounced. Anyway, what happens is when a glacier is sweeping through the high country, it pushes along these rocks and creates these rocks that end up looking kind of like sheep. Montagne is the word for sheep in French. That's where we get the word mutton from, for example. So anyway, this is what's going on here. Now, there's a number of different stories behind this as to whether or not these montagne, these roche montagne, does it look like a sheep? They kind of do look like a bunch of sheep in this particular drawing or this photograph. Some people think that it could be that the rocks kind of look like the wigs that the barristers used to wear that were made out of wool. Wool is from sheep. Or maybe it was the fact that they'd smooth those wigs with mutton fat. So maybe that's why they called it a roche montagne. Anyway, I don't know. But anyway, you can now see this site today. This is what it looks like today. And you can see that Muir's drawing, he just kind of barely included Mount Dana there in the background. And as you can see, he made these drawings multiple times, probably initially in 1870s. Then he made this little drawing in around 1880 when he was preparing to write a book. He left out Mount Dana in the background. And eventually this ended up in another book called Picturesque California as an engraving much later. So this one really goes through a lot of iterations like that one of the snow banners that we saw earlier. Okay, we're winding down, folks. We're gonna have just a couple more sites here and then we'll be done. As you probably have already figured out where this is, but I'm gonna read you a little passage. We're in the habit of calling all of parts of God's world deserts that are not fit for our uses. Irishmen call deserts countries not adapted to growing potatoes. So do the Hindu countries not fitted for rice. Nature makes no more ado than the so-called desolation of country than any fraction of one. Mono, now an icy sea, now a salt hot lake, now desolate with fire, now with frost, now with sunshine. Fertile lands made into deserts and death valleys simply because some mister died in them. And yeah, if you've guessed Moana Lake, you guessed correctly. This is Moana Lake here. And as you can see, you've got, and for those of you that have a Windows machine, it's probably something that you see every time you fire up your computer. It's pretty much the same view that Muir saw all those years ago. And geologically, this is a fantastic place. Oh, actually another little tip. This is a really easy place. You can actually drive to it. If you go off to the east side of the Sierra, this is the Woe-Nelly Deli turnoff. You go up to the top of that and you can see this beautiful view. Okay, one last one that I need to share with you. This is also another bonus one that is not in the book. You've got the longitude and latitude there. And this is important to understand Muir's idea of the Sierra. So gloriously colored and so radiant, the Sierra seemed not clothed in light, but wholly composed of it, like the wall of some celestial city. Then it seemed to me that it should be called not Nevada or Snowy Range, but the Range of Light. After 10 years of wandering and wondering in the heart of it, rejoicing in its glorious floods of light, the white beams and the morning streams through the passes, the noonday radiance of the crystal rocks, the flush of the alpenglow, the iris spray of countless waterfalls, it still seems above all others the Range of Light. And this is me visiting the site. You can also drive to this one. It's along Rush Creek there, not too far from Lee Vining if you ever want to go there. So yeah, thank you for listening. I mean, this has been a really exciting thing for me to present this again. There's the cover of the book. I've even added the URL there if you're interested in ordering a copy. And I really want you to take away a few things. You can have Muir's drawings. Now, of course, they're all available online. You can look for them yourself if you want, but this is a really neat, compact way of doing it. I also want you to take this book and have purpose while you're outdoors. Go outside and take a look at this surrounding. Maybe you can use Google Earth since we can't go up to Yosemite right now. And more, also take a moment and enjoy these spots, just like John Muir did. Take the time. I don't make sketches particularly, but take the time to make a sketch for yourself. And then most importantly, thank Muir while you're there. Thank Muir for giving you the opportunity to go to these places. This particular site is not in, I thought this was going to be a thing called Eagle Peak. It was not. It's a long story. There's so many places in the valley called Eagle. But anyway, so yeah, and I thank a lot of people. Of course, I thank the Sierra Club. I certainly thank the Yosemite Conservancy for helping me publish this book. It's been an amazing ride. I thank the University of Pacific Scholarly Artistic and Activities Grant for helping to fund this. And then most of all, I thank the Muir family and his descendants who again gave the papers of John Muir to the University of Pacific to give me purpose. And this is me in my office. So for those of you that are sitting, sheltering at home in your offices or whatever, even I can be jealous of this picture because this is my office for the last couple of years, was being out in Yosemite. So thank you so much for coming today. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and tell me what I need to do next, Chris.
All right, thank you so much. So again, thank you. We're seeing lots of people saying thank you so much. Couple questions on here. Amazing content and information. What is the significance does the Yosemite portion of the John Muir Trail have? Are there any documented facts or sites along that were sketched by Muir?
Yeah, so the John Muir Trail, wow, that's a big one. So the John Muir Trail actually goes from Yosemite Valley. It goes up through Merced Canyon. So for those of you that have hiked up to Vernal Fall or Nevada Fall or even to Half Dome, you can say that you have hiked the John Muir Trail because you have. But then it goes up into Tuolumne Meadow and then it makes its way clear south for 211 miles to the top of Mount Whitney. Muir probably has quite a few drawings. In fact, Bob Hare would be able to tell us for sure, but I'm sure there are plenty of drawings that Muir made along that trail that would also be quite accessible to go to. So yeah, the Muir Trail was created, I had it written down someplace, I think it was created in 1938, long after Muir had died, but it really is kind of ties Muir's love of the Sierra and Muir's love of Yosemite together. Yeah, thank you
All
for that
right,
question.
yeah. So on here, just thank you for letting us follow along on Google Earth. That was really cool.
Excellent.
So we got some people that were able to follow along. That's great. Thanks, Mike. Terrific presentation. Thank you to the Muir family for giving the university these invaluable artifacts. Right?
Thank
Yeah,
you, Bill
exactly.
and
And
Ross, if
then,
you're out there.
and then, are all the images that you shared in the book?
No, a couple of the images that are in the presentation are not in the book. There are 25 images in the book. And then of course, all the images are available through our website, although they're a little not so easy to find. The book is a nicely curated content of just the top 25 that you can find. Yeah.
All right, excellent, wonderful. So we just got lots of people kind of signing off. Just for everyone's knowledge, this talk, you will be able to find it at www.alumni pacificalumni.org/tigers together. So that way, if you want to follow along, if you want to go out, purchase the book, and then follow along in the book as Mike is talking, then that would be a great thing as well. We will also put the link on there to get the book, so that way you have access to that. And just as another heads up, I saw some people mention it. If you are interested in transcribing some of those journals and actually being able to see that and contribute to this great work, on the 27th, we will be having working with Nicole Grady, and she'll be talking about how to do that. So again, at the alumni website, pacificalumni.org, we will have an event for that. So keep your eyes and ears open. And again, thank you so much, Mike. This was fantastic.
Thank you.
From the alumni, from everybody. So.
All right.
All
Thank
right.
you again. And I hope to see you all in Yosemite soon enough when we can be there and enjoy that beautiful scenery. Thank you again.